All right, so yes, welcome everyone to this development activities meeting. At this time, I'll pass it over to the applicant team.
So good afternoon. This is John Kamen, and I am counsel for the developer. And let me just introduce the team that we have with us today. We have our planner, Karen Green. We have our architect, Mark Hensler. Also Tom Price, also our architect, both from Strata. And then we have Todd Reboard from Walnut Capital on the phone with us as well. And we're really thankful to the city and to both organizations for putting together this development activities meeting, and look forward to sharing our project with you. So Mark, I don't know if you want to start sharing and we can just walk them through the slides.
Sure thing.
And I would just say, while Mark's pulling that up, there are two things that we're looking to discuss at this meeting. One is sort of an introduction for the project. The second is we will be attending the Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting in September for approval for the parking carousels that we're showing. Great, so we go, oh, one sec, Mark,
Okay.
we lost, there we go. Are you trying to make it full
Good.
screen? There we go.
No, it was asking me to do a lot of things. So
Okay,
we're
so
good now.
can we go to the next slide, please? This is just a quick introduction or quick agenda for what we're going to talk about. So we did our introductions, site location, and the existing conditions, a brief design overview, and then Q&A. So next slide, Mark. So this is a bird's eye view, and a real bird's eye view of the site. Recognizing most of the names who are on the Zoom this evening. As you know, the site is on McKee Place and goes really from the UPMC building down to the Louisa Street at this point. There were formerly some houses there, and also the UJF had its offices here. Next slide, please. This is just another sort of bird's eye view of the existing conditions. You can see the new building that here constructed on the corner. This is more of a view from, call it, 4th Street down. And our site is highlighted with the red hashes around it. Next slide, Mark. This is another view of the site. You can see part of the demolition has already occurred. And then we do have the existing buildings that exist between Louisa Street and the demolished building. That building on the right, as you look at the screen, is owned by, I believe, by UPMC. Next slide, please. These are just some more shots of existing conditions. This is a shot at Louisa Street. Next slide, please. This is the same shot from the Louisa Street, but looking towards Forbes down McKee. Next slide, please. And this is, again, also just a shot looking the other way down McKee. Next slide, please. This is a shot from, I believe, Louisa looking up. I think if you look in the foreground, you can see the stairs. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into the design overview of the project that we're talking about building. So we can go to the next slide, please, Mark. So these are just some highlights for the overall site. The site is 67,230 square feet. Our proposed building footprint is roughly 26,027 feet. The height is the building is 114 feet. Which is less than the 120-foot max that exists in the district. We're proposing 11 stories, roughly 226,000 feet. It's going to be mixed use with 5,000 feet of retail, approximately 159 units, 60 parking spaces, and a deeded setback that I know most of the people on this phone should be familiar with, but there is a deeded setback that runs along McKee that's existed from when the plans were originally laid out. around the turn of the century, and that's a 40-foot deeded setback that runs along the entire length of McKee. Next slide, please. So this is an overall site plan, and we'll come into it with a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to take a minute to explain this. As you can see, as you look at the top of your screen, you have McKee Place that runs along the entire frontage of the site. That's an approximately 60-foot wide right of way. And then there is a deeded setback that's actually on our property that holds a 40-foot line. And again, this runs along all of McKee. We're in development at this point as to how we think that 40 feet area can be used. But as you can see from what Mark has programmed here and what the Strata team has, we're talking about that being a very attractive public realm. And in particular, walking paths, dense shrubbery, and basically like a linear park in order to engage the public realm along with our building. As you proceed around our building, you'll see one of the things that we're talking about here is putting in parking carousels to go ahead and to alleviate us putting otherwise structured parking under a building and above ground. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about how that will work. What the carousels also allow us to do is to preserve more of the green space that buffers along the paper street in the back and ultimately along Coltart Street. There are some trees and other dense vegetation that exists in this area. This allows us to do less disturbance and allows us to preserve many of those amenities, as you'll see as you come in. The other thing that this allows us to do is to limit traffic circulation on really one side of the building, which we think ultimately is better for the neighborhood and better for our long-term goals for how we plan to manage, our hopes for Louisa Street and public realm improvements. Next slide, please. So this is more of a rendered site plan than we just saw before. And a couple of things just to highlight again. You're looking at sort of this dense linear park in front of the site. That's within the 40-foot deeded setback. And you can see how we see that interplaying as something that's very active and pleasing for gathering and pedestrians. And you can see as well that by going to the carousels, which we're talking about, that does allow us to concentrate this parking on what I would call the UPMC side of the property. There are some amenities that we are showing in the rear of our building. Those amenities will be for our building and for the tenants located therein. And then we have, essentially some back of house and other functions as you proceed down, call it to the easterly side of the property towards Louisa. Next slide, please, Mark. So this is a rendering that we've been working through. You can see the at least concepts as we have at this point. We're still working through the design process and CDAP process and all the other things that eventually will be coming. This will be coming to Planning Commission as well. But we did want to share with you at least some preliminary thoughts on how these multi-unit residential would appear and fit into what was there. Next slide, please. So what you saw before was a perspective from the east. This is a perspective from the north. And again, we're looking at this point sort of above Forbes Avenue, almost on Fifth Avenue, looking down at the site for this aerial bird's eye view. Next slide, please. This is a perspective of it looking west. And again, this height or this perspective is taken from almost at Fifth Avenue as well. Next slide, please. And here's an aerial perspective of it looking from the south side. And And you can see again how we envision the building sort of fitting in and being developed here. One of the things I did want to point out is by doing what we're talking about, you can see that there's still those trees and greenery is able to remain. Next slide, please. And this is a view from Louisa Street, look in Halkett, looking up at the building. Next slide, please. Another view from Louisa. Next slide. This is a view from McKee Place looking towards Ford Street. Next slide. And then this is a sort of more zoomed in view of how we're thinking about landscaping and programming the 40-foot deeded setback. Next slide, please. This is a view again of the 40-foot deeded setback, and I would note that again, this is on our property. You can see the sidewalk in the foreground. That is remaining. This is not in place of the sidewalk. These are improvements that will actually be on our property within its boundaries. Next slide, please. Another view of the 40-foot deeded setback. Next slide. So this is a view of the and some in-depth perspective of what we're talking about for the parking carousels. These are a parking program that has been very well established in many other cities, Boston, New York, et cetera, where you have more urban environments. As we looked at the site, a lot of the challenge was put to us is how can we disturb the most in the most efficient way in a minimal amount possible. The other thing that we were looking at is how can we go ahead and not have to develop a garage. This is a much greener approach, less concrete, less waste, less time for construction, less interference with the neighbors. The carousels that we're talking about, these would be approximately 61 feet in height, and they are entirely electric. They are run through an app. So when you were getting ready to come get your car, you would go ahead and text the carousel. You have a space that's assigned to you. It would rotate around and have your car ready for you to go ahead and back out. The other nice thing about them is they have a charging option where every one of these is an EV charging available. And we think that also is very helpful in terms of attracting the tenants that we want to have so they can have charging in the site when they need to have it. I would note that these have already been deployed in the Strip District. The site that you're looking at in the upper picture is an installation of this exact product that was done off of, I believe it's Mulberry Way in the Strip. We have another client who's utilizing them, and the tenants are very happy with it. And they've had literally no issues with it since it's been installed. So again, we think it is a valuable option that allows us to go ahead and to meet the parking demands that we have for the site, and also allows us to program parking in the least conspicuous area, as opposed to having to have a whole layer of parking that would be essentially our first floor of the building. Want to go to the next slide, please, Mark? So just to show you sort of the way that we've thought through, again, tucking this in. Again, if you're looking at the slide, McKee is on the north side, Luis is on the east side, and we're putting these carousels sort of tucked in the back westerly corner of the property. What that allows for is, again, us to preserve much of the green space that exists, for us to create more green space along the back without having to go ahead and program either a precast or regular garage being there, and also allows us to have a much better pedestrian realm and circulation around the building than if we had to go ahead and have this floor as a garage. I'd also note that, you're not going to have headlights coming out from the garage that you would have had if you had to build a garage, because what happens is you basically pull into the stacker, the car turns off, and it goes ahead and rotates it around. So all of the vehicular activity is going to be focused essentially on the westerly side of the property. Next slide, Mark. So we're now at the point, I know we went through that relatively quickly, but we're now at the point where we're happy to go ahead and take questions and answer any questions that anybody may have about the proposal that we have. And Mark, just for the sake of making our answers to the questions more efficient, if you could toggle back to the slide right before this, the site plan, that's probably going to be the easiest way to have discussion. So at this point, I'd open it up for questions that anybody may have, and we're happy to answer them.
All right, yeah, thank you, John, for the presentation. Appreciate it. I'll be kind of looking through to see any questions. I think we do have one coming in on the chat from Mavis.
Yeah, I saw Mavis's question asking for the how cars are going to access. Well, we created this site drive, and we're holding all the vehicular access on the westerly side. So if you see where it says property line, that's the area where we're going to go ahead and have all the vehicles access. There's plenty of room for two-way traffic there. And based upon the utilization that we anticipate, we don't believe that there'll be any issues whatsoever in terms of going ahead and utilizing this for the cars. This is the same driveway, by the way, that the UJF used when it had its office building there.
Thank you. Looks like the next question in the chat from Andrea Boykowitz. Do you have a shadow study for Colchart?
Mark, I don't know if we've done shadow studies yet. I know we would probably do that as part of the planning commission presentation. I don't know that we've done them yet. Do you have an answer to that?
Yes, we did them for the ZDR application. And it didn't show any significant overcast on them. Since this is more or less the south end of the building, most of our shadows are going to be heading off towards the north, toward McKee Place.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we'll go to a hand raised. Katie, you can go ahead.
Hi, I have a few back-to-back questions. First, can you remind me like how many units you expect with this building?
At this point, I think are we 159? Is that right, Mark? You're muted, Mark.
Sorry. Yes, that's correct. 159 units.
Okay, and then how do you expect like the layout of these units in terms of people? Like how many people per unit?
So we haven't fully figured out exactly how we're going to program everything yet. I think part of that depends on ultimate, function and how it goes, but I don't know that we know the answer to that at this point.
Okay. So I'm a student at the University of Pittsburgh and I live in Central Oakland. And I know previously in the proposal of this project, you were talking about the people that you wanted to attract and making features that are attractive to like this population that you're targeting. Do you have an idea of like who you imagine like being in this building and also like the income ranges of the people that you expect to be in this building?
So I don't know that we've developed it that much yet. I would tell you that, a lot of what we've looked at is, people being able to be there and being able to walk to Oakland and for what else they're doing. So I don't know that we've fully programmed it yet or know who we're going to attract, but my guess is probably a mix would be.
Okay, I was just curious. I know I had some friends who lived previous at the old Wanna Capitol building right there along McKee. I think they were paying like 500, it was 4-person, and I think they were paying like $597 per person, which I think is a pretty good price in Oakland. So I was just curious if like the price ranges would be similar to that in the future, or at least like affordable for students, since they do have like occupy a large percentage of the population in Oakland.
Yeah. I think that's all going to be a function of cost, so probably too early to say.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Going back to the chat, another follow-up question from Mavis on how many vehicles in each carousel?
So, Mark, do you want to go back to that and we can just show them? So the carousel is essentially a double wide, if you will. So it was actually, by the way, this was actually invented in Pittsburgh as part of the same technology as the Ferris wheel in the turn of the century. So right now, I believe I think it's 14 cars a carousel. Does that sound right, Mark? Or maybe 12
Yep.
cars per carousel?
And it's 14.
14 cars per carousel.
Great, thank you. Another question from Andrea in the chat. Wondering if you could provide a materials palette for the building cladding?
Yeah, I mean, as we get to planning commission, we'll certainly have that and we'll be happy to share that again with everybody. But you know, there's a lot of work that has to be done still with CDAP and working through that. But I think at this point, it's fair to say that we're contemplating. Mark, if you want to go back a couple slides to the rendering, I think it's 2 slides. Sorry, it's more than that. These are still, well, here, maybe, Mark, do you want to talk about that one's okay. Go back to the view from the 40 feet. Next one. There you go. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about, again, this is all super preliminary because ultimately it has to go to planning commission and get approved, but we're talking about different bricks, metals, and cement board at this time, right?
Yeah, we're looking predominantly masonry. That's the red you see in the rendering, as well as the black manganese brick on the bottom. And then the material we're looking at the top and that comes down the middle is a commercial grade fiber cement. So it's more than what you would typically see in a residential setting. It's the higher grade. And then we're planning on doing a granite or otherwise more salt resistant, Pittsburgh resistant, so to speak, base around here. So all, sturdy, masonry kind of appropriate materials on the ground level.
Great, thank you. Another question from Andrea in the chat, asking about the building program and how the 5,000 square feet of ancillary uses will fit within the structure.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit to be determined. We don't know if that's going to be restaurant, if that's going to be amenity space. I think that we'll see exactly how that plays out. We certainly know that our focus wants to be on having some street level activity. So it's going to be, a little bit of a wait and see as to how it gets actually programmed.
All right. Don't see any more questions yet, so I'll give a few moments just for folks to, if they have any last questions. Let's see. And
I see Mavis's question. Yeah, we certainly anticipate that the landscaping it will be lighted. As Mark shows here, just conceptually, you'll have, he's showing some decorative lights that run across. I think, we want this to be warm, inviting, and safe. So there's certainly going to be lighting on it that makes it comfortable for the public realm.
Great. Next question in the chat. Is there a tentative timeline for the project?
So I think our plan would be
Alexa, stop.
Oh, hello. I think the plan would be for us to get our approvals, in the fall on this, and then hopefully to be able to start next year.
Great, thank
But,
you.
there are a lot of things that have to come in place, approvals, financing, cost, all those things, but I think we're looking at it as starting at some point in hopefully 2025, probably about a year from now.
Thank you. We'll go to question from Andrea in the chat. Given how many questions aren't answered, will there be another dam before the hearing? So I think she's asking if there's unknowns and things aren't determined, will there be another dam? I think, that's something that would have to be determined by a zoning team and the zoning administrator.
So
it's a
let me just be clear. The only thing that is going to the zoning board right now would be approval of the car stackers. There would be a planning commission process that would happen when we go ahead and essentially walk through the approvals that we would need to get. I don't know that we would necessarily need to have another dam meeting, but we would be happy to go ahead and share updates with the two RCOs as they happen. And I don't think, I'm not aware of any.
Hey, John, I think we might have lost you, might have froze up there. Okay, I think John might have frozen up there. We'll give him a moment.
I'm back. I'm sorry about that. I'm back. We just had a power surge in my building. We're back.
Oh, okay, gotcha. No, glad you're back.
So I don't know where you lost me, but what I was saying is that I don't think there are any questions that were unanswered, but there is a whole public process that's going to happen. The only thing that this is really about is the ZBA coming up on September 12th. But there's a lot more process that has to happen with materials and all this other stuff.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Katie with her hand up.
Oh, you might have just answered my question, but what I was asking earlier about the unit, the number of people in it, and then the cost for the unit, that the public will first be able to see that before it goes for approval, correct?
Well, I mean, the cost per unit is not something that's ever open to public approval. I think the city code right now limits the amount of number of people per unit to no more than 3. But we don't know what our mix is, and generally planning commission won't approve floor plans. But
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments out there?
so I would just like to thank everybody for their time, and say that, we worked very, very hard to get something that is, we think, great for Oakland and great for the public realm in particular, and thinking about this deeded setback. And just appreciate everyone's time and patience.
For sure. And I think one last question came in from Mavis on the number of the vehicle carousels.
I think we're 5, right? Right, Mark? Or are we 4?
We're 4, John.
4 carousels.
And maybe to that question, you can maybe talk about kind of how you got to that, how you fulfilling the parking requirements, because I understand there's some reductions. If you may want to talk through like how many spaces you accommodate and how much you need to meet the zoning.
Right. So we had this analyzed by our traffic engineer, Trans Associate, who looked at sort of the programming for the 159 units. And then went ahead and looked at the code with regard to what you could supply for parking. There are reductions that you're able to take because you're in Oakland. There is bike parking that will be available, and there'll be more than ample bike parking here because we anticipate a lot of people biking, a lot of people walking. So I think when we figured it all out, the number that we needed was a little bit less than 60, and we went with 60.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Great. And I think the last thing I would say is let's just continue to coordinate between the applicant team and our RCOs as we work through some of those questions, and if there's answers that come along. Yeah, just make sure we all stay in touch.
Right, and Andrea and Georgia both know where to find me. So if there are additional questions that come up, feel free to email me and the team, and we'll be happy to get back to you guys with it. We don't have to wait for another, meeting or something like that. There are things that come up in the interim. Just let me know. We'll be happy to respond.
Yeah. Maybe just sort of for future reference, right? Immediately facing this view that you have here in this particular slide, on the other side of the street is the fire station, and just for your own peace of mind, I don't know that big heavy trees right up against the edge of the curb, right where the fire trucks are kind of maneuvering to back in or exit quickly. There's a high potential for some accidents. So if the tree program on the sidewalk as you go forward with design could just sort of accommodate that eventuality.
Yeah, I know that's something that the city looks at in its standards. I know there could be alternative compliance, but as we get closer, I think what we were showing was city spec for street trees. But I think as we get going, if there's something like that that comes up from Domi or the reviews, we'll be happy to accommodate.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, if there's no last comments, questions, yeah, thank you all again for attending. We really appreciate it. Look forward to this, as it moves along in the process. So with that, thank you all, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.